Hello and welcome to another episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute. Well, people are well aware that if the price of oil goes up, then the price of gasoline is going up, and probably fuel surcharges for deliveries and airline tickets. With the Israeli-U.S. attacks in the Persian Gulf, we have also been warned about the potential for acute scarcities of things like jet fuel and even business shutdowns. Some may have even heard odd warnings about shortages of fertilizers and helium. These problems could get much worse as inventories continue to decline, with the primary crude problem touching on everything to do with our bathrooms, our hobbies, food consumption, our jobs, and much more. However, the overall economic problem is actually much worse and extremely complicated. The point of the following chemistry lesson is not to teach chemistry, but to show you how complicated the market is to our benefit and how much cost and chaos the government can interject into our lives without us even knowing it. The direct point is to take just one minor byproduct of oil refinery, sulfur, and to show how it is further processed, the complicated structure of production, and how that impacts our lives in a very positive way, and how government intervention can disrupt that structure and lower our real incomes and standards of living. The point is to demonstrate that the market economy is very efficient, productive, and much more complicated than you might think. Entrepreneurs have found a plethora of these byproducts that were previously thrown away or resulted in pollution, and now turned them into things that benefit everybody in many different ways. Government interventions such as war and tariffs disrupt these structures of production, drive up prices, and cause extensive and often unseen negative consequences on our standard of living. In this case, we will see how government misadventure in the Persian Gulf will drive up the bill to fix your next plumbing problem, among many other adverse effects. Now, the Persian Gulf area in the Middle East is a largely uninhabited desert, but they produce and sell a large percentage of total crude oil production. They also refine some of the crude, producing both fuels and other byproducts. The variety of byproducts are used to produce such things as plastics, and then there's natural gas, which is a joint product that comes naturally from drilling for oil, but was once unused or simply burned off. Byproduct chemicals from crude oil and natural gas are known as petrochemicals. These in turn serve as ingredients in virtually all goods that we buy and use, including thousands of everyday products involved with our food, our clothing, our shelter, as well as our entertainment, our employment, and our education, including all types of plastics, synthetic rubbers, synthetic fibers, and fertilizers. This also includes virtually all the packaging and containers of all the products we buy, and all aspects of transporting all of these products around the globe, from raw materials to finished products onto store shelves, including all of the tires, roadways, and airport runways used to transport them. The one example I will go over is sulfuric acid. We obtain sulfur from sour gas, which is natural gas in its natural state with high concentrations of sulfur in it. Natural gas is also the source of helium that you've probably heard about. The sour gas smells like a bad fart or rotten eggs, both of which contain large amounts of sulfur. The sour gas is treated to remove the sulfur in the form of hydrogen sulfide. A, a chemical process is then used to convert that into liquid elemental sulfur. This liquid molten sulfur is then sprayed into a furnace to dry into sulfur dioxide. This is then converted into sulfur trioxide, and with each of these steps, expending and recovering large amounts of heat energy. This produces concentrated sulfuric acid, which is then diluted to produce the sulfuric acid product. Now, sulfuric acid is called the king of chemicals because it is foundational for the making of phosphate fertilizers, car batteries, and a large variety of chemicals. It is used to produce a large variety of detergents, of dyes, and even explosives. It's a primary chemical for leaching the metal ores from copper, nickel, cobalt, and uranium to separate the desired metals from the crushed rock. These are all the critical metals for the modern high-tech economy. Sulfuric acid is essential to their production. Copper is used to transport electricity and is the primary metal for plumbing pipes in our homes and businesses. And it's vital for producing advanced technological products. If the supply of acid is disrupted, production of these metals and all of the goods that they help produce are also disrupted and made much scarcer and more expensive. The abundance of natural gas in the Persian Gulf area provides all the sour gas and, importantly, all the low-cost energy to give the area a comparative advantage in the production of sulfuric acid. One example of the general economic problem with the war in the Persian Gulf is the disruption of this sulfuric acid in the production of copper. Multi-billion-dollar copper mines cannot produce copper without the acid. This critical metal is already in a long-term structural production deficit. More is consumed than is currently produced. It is also a vital input into the construction of data centers, the actual data processing equipment, and the flow of electricity that powers these data centers. It is also a vital input into the plumbing of homes and businesses, so that your next plumbing bill might also be inflated as a result. Speaking of good chemistry, side B of this episode, I'm going to be replaying a recent interview I did with Julia La Roche. And we talked about all sorts of things, including how I got into Austrian economics in the very first place. So thanks for watching this episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute.
Dr. Mark Thornton, Senior Fellow at the Mises Institute. It is so wonderful to welcome you back to the show. Great to see you, Dr. Thornton. Really appreciate you taking the time.
It's great to see you, Julia. It's fantastic to be back on the show.
Well, wonderful to have you back. And I have to say, the last time we had you was back in December. You made your debut on the show. And I always say that we have the nicest people on the internet that watch this show, but wow, we have a lot of fans of yours. And so I'm thrilled to welcome you back. And that's always great to see because you were recommended by our viewers and they certainly love you. And gosh, Dr. Thornton, what a year it's been so far. I believe it feels like time's flying by, but so much has happened. So since we last spoke in December, let's kind of reset the table, if you will, when it comes to the big picture macro view for you. Now that we're halfway through April here, how are you thinking about things? What's been on your radar of late? What is your outlook? What do you make of where we are when it relates to the economy, Also, markets, especially here domestically in the US, markets continuing to set records. Yeah, just kind of what's your thought process? Like, what do you make of everything that we've seen transpire? And as you know, Dr. Thornton, you can take all the time you need to set the table.
Well, thank you very much, Julia. I think we start with, just the ongoing structural aspects of the economy, which we discussed last time, that follow the analysis follows from the Austrian business cycle theory. And that all looks backward in time to a 16-year period of upward movement in the stock markets. So we've had an extended period of boom and higher prices and new records, especially in the NASDAQ, but in the S&P 500. And, that tells us that the actions of the Fed, some of them direct and obvious and right in front of us, have been to expand money and credit in a way that artificially stimulates the economy and keeps interest rates down to a bare minimum or artificially low, and that sets in motion all sorts of changes that we're seeing and that are going to continue to play out despite, of course, all of the things we've seen: the correction in the precious metals, the war, the increase in oil prices and energy prices. But it's really that structural facets of the economy where, the typical economist, when the Fed is increasing the supply of money and credit, they say, well, that's going to cause inflation or higher prices or higher CPI. But the Austrian business cycle theory says, well, that's just one feature of what the Fed causes. They also cause a boom in stock markets and asset prices, which we've seen. We've seen higher prices, and we anticipate even higher prices going forward. And then the third thing is really the clincher, I think, for most people. And that is that this boom that the Fed creates, giving the Fed creating all sorts of new credit, that is a big advantage to the people who already own the most wealth in the economy, because they can leverage up all of their assets, all of their investments. And of course, that lower interest rate increases all asset prices. So the people at the very top are benefited a great deal, and people in the middle and at the bottom, people at the bottom don't own any assets. They have net debt in the economy. They don't have any assets. All as they get is higher prices and lower real wage rates. And so, of course, that phenomenon since really 2021 or 2022, when this new term came in about the K-shaped economy, where the upper 10% or 15% or 20% are doing extraordinarily well, and people in the lower ends of the income distribution are actually experiencing negative economic conditions. And that's what we're seeing. And that gives me a lot of evidence and a lot of not really faith, but support that the Austrian business cycle theory is really what does help explain the modern economy, subject to a Federal Reserve that's, trying to artificially alter the economy. And so that's the long run trend that we're seeing. And ultimately, we're going to get some sort of crisis. Hank Paulson was on the TV on Bloomberg this weekend, and he even admitted that. I mean, I was really surprised that he even admitted that there could possibly be something like an economic crisis. But he did say that. He said, we don't really know what's going on with this private equity, private credit, and we haven't gone through a full cycle, so we won't know what to expect until we go through the full cycle. And then he said, with an economic crisis. So that's the end of the story with the Austrian business cycle theory. But we're somewhere in the middle. We may be closer to the end, obviously, given that we've been in this boom for 16 years. But then it's at that point that we look at these shorter term changes, the correction in metals, the boom in oil prices, the war, all of those things have to be taken account of.
So right now, looking at that Austrian business cycle theory, somewhere in the middle, as you put it, headed toward a crisis. We haven't seen the crisis yet, but goodness, what are the signposts that are most worrisome to you right now, Dr. Thornton?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, we're always looking for the black swan. Where is the black swan going to be in the economy? And the Austrian theory says, well, it's really systemic in the economy. Anywhere there's credit, there's likely to be overinvestment, male investment, investment in advanced technologies, especially just because of the way the financial models work out. When you get artificially low rates, people tend to invest in advanced technology. So, of course, we're looking at artificial intelligence and the data centers, just like a lot of other people are looking at. And then, of course, we're looking at all of the financial sector, the banks, the insurance companies, private equity, private credit. Private equity and private credit are of particular interest to me because it's what we call sequestered capital, in that it's sort of cordoned off, and where markets don't have, where the information, as some of your guests have pointed out, some of the information, which I love this show, some of the information about those markets isn't readily available to the public. It's not recorded on a day-to-day basis. And we very often see those black swans emerge precisely from those areas in the economy because they tend not to get observed. And so the problems tend to fester, and people get a little corrupt in that they try to cover up these problems and paper them over and shuffle the problems around, which we are seeing in private equity and private credit. So sequestered capital is of particular interest in those high-tech investments in advanced technology, because that's what the theory points to, one of those two things. But of course, the banks are all intertwined with this, and now things like insurance companies and pension plans because of private equity investments in pension plans. So the Austrian theory says that this is ubiquitous across finance. It's the artificially low interest rate is sending a false signal to all investors and all entrepreneurs. And so the problems are ubiquitous throughout. And the black swan is just the first one to see the light of day. And so I think the theory is very accurate. It doesn't really help us pinpoint where it's going to come out of, because it can come out of anywhere. But certainly artificial intelligence and private equity are high on my list.
Hey everyone, I hope you are enjoying this interview. If you can, take a quick moment and hit that subscribe button. We are on a mission to hit our next goal of 100,000 subscribers, and your support could really help us get there. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the interview. Okay, before we go any further or any deeper here, I didn't ask you this last time, but I certainly wanted to, and we're talking about the Austrian School of Economics, and you have been a voice for Austrian economics for decades at the Mises Institute. How did you get drawn into the Austrian School of Economics? And what is it that keeps you so fired up about it today? Because I imagine, Dr. Thornton, we have a lot of people who follow it and are fans of it. but I imagine that there's oftentimes pushback on the space as well.
Oh, yes. I mean, we are a very small group compared to all other economists. We're not in the mainstream of things. We don't really dominate anything within mainstream academic um, economics or the Fed or the Treasury or government or anything like that because we're seen as sort of the anti-economics, anti-Keynesian economics, anti-mainstream economics. We're more of a traditional, um, based on reason and natural processes. We're really the inheritors of classical economics of Adam Smith and limited government and all those things. Whereas, the mainstream profession has gets a lot of money from government. They get a lot of jobs, all of the high paying jobs at the Fed and in government. They don't want to see us walking through the door. They want people who are adept at selling the idea that the government must control various things and must regulate various things and must solve problems in a free market economy, whereas the Austrians view the free market economy as the source of our standard of living and of increasing wealth and innovation, of new technology, of all of the benefits, of course, come from entrepreneurs and savers and the market economy and competition. And almost all economists, except for the old school economists, maybe some Chicago economists, and that sort of thing, they all adhere to this big government Keynesian approach in the economy. So we're not really appreciated by all of those groups, and they dominate the profession, and they dominate all of the government positions and all of the main academic journals and that sort of thing. So um, now I think what attracted me to it, it was probably part natural, but I from a very young age, I was familiar with business and earning money and collecting coins. And, and I wasn't around when they stopped. I was very young when they stopped minting silver coins, but I knew that all my relatives were collecting all the silver coins. And I didn't have any. And they stopped redeeming silver certificates. And then in 1971, they went off the gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that seems like a really big deal. And then, of course, growing up in the 1970s with going off of the gold standard, the Vietnam War, the oil shortages, and the all of that was going on, and high inflation and high unemployment. And so when I went to college, I wanted to learn more about that. And so I became an economics major, and I realized that mainstream textbook analysis really did not have a worthwhile explanation of these phenomenon. And I started looking around, and I just was lucky, very, very lucky to have found an entree into the world of Austrian economics and libertarianism and that kind of thing. And because I graduated during the Depression of 1982, and there were no jobs, I decided to go to graduate school. And I went to the only place really where you could learn in the United States more about Austrian economics. And I just happened to go to Auburn University in Alabama. And then the next year, the Mises Institute moved its operations to Auburn.
Wow.
And so that's why
it was meant to be.
That's why I've been the face of this thing for so very, very long, is because of those fantastic happenstance and circumstances. And, when I got into it, there were no academically active PhD Austrian economists. And I was told that the Austrian school was dead and that it was a thing of the past and that it was never going to be resurrected. And fortunately, Lou Rockwell and the Mises Institute have given a home for Austrian economics, and it's really experienced a rebirth. There are lots of places now where you can study Austrian economics, and it's the favorite brand of economics. It's the favorite school of economics for aspiring young adults.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's where a lot of our programs are directed to, but a lot of very bright, go-getter young adults from the United States and around the world are involved in our programs. And so I think there's really been a rebirth of Austrian economics. And as bad as I think things are going to get in the economy, and with money specifically, potentially with war, I have a very optimistic view of the future that we can really do something about these awful trends that the state has put in place and is disrupting and destroying people's lives, and that the Austrian school lessons and their message are resonating very strongly across society. And, it's my job to see that more people get a chance to at least learn about it, because you won't learn about it typically in high school or college or anything like that. So that's what we're here for.
Well, you can come to this channel and listen to folks such as yourself. Okay, let's dive further in some of these concerning trends, because you mentioned the K-shaped economy. This is a topic that has come up time and time again on this channel. A lot of our viewers, they intuit it. Now, you've also written about the Cantillon effect, the idea that whoever gets new money first wins and everyone else absorbs the pain later. So I would love for you to tie that idea back to the K-shaped economy that we've discussed and many have heard about. How does the Cantillon effect explain the K-shaped economy more precisely than what we hear in the mainstream, if you will?
Yeah, they're very, very much related. Richard Cantillon was an Irish economist in the early 1700s during John Law's money bubble, the South Sea bubble, the Mississippi bubble. He ended up making a ton of money off of it. And after being a very wealthy person, he sat down and wrote a book about the whole thing, and he explained economics for the first time. And the main thing he was trying to explain was the phenomenon of money and the business cycle and how it elevated the crony capitalists and the political elites, which he was a banker for these people, so he knew them well, and how it impoverished everybody else. And he presented in his book a little model, of an economy at the time where somebody discovers a gold mine, and of course the mine owner and the mine workers are the beneficiary of finding all of that gold, and they go out and buy luxury items. They drink wine instead of beer. They eat meat instead of bread, and they raise the price of wine and of meat, and they reduce the supply of beer and bread, and so there's less to go around for everybody else. And so he explains this phenomenon through the book with these simple theoretical conceptual models of how the world works in a small setting. And so it's actually very difficult to see the Cantillon effect in the large scale. It doesn't show up in the data really all that well. But it's a persistent effect. And so, and I go back and I look at, in my book, The Skyscraper Curse, I go back and look at um, the various economic crises of the past, and we see the same sort of pattern of, a period of low interest rates and money supply growth, and a dispersion in the distribution of income, where the uber wealthy are getting much, much wealthier, and the working class is losing ground because the prices are going up, but their wage rates are staying relatively constant. So their purchasing power is being diminished. And of course, we see that in its full glory right now. Every conversation I have, people are complaining about increases in prices, but nobody's getting increases in wages. And meanwhile, stock prices are at an all-time high. And that phenomenon goes back in time, even before the Great Depression. But it also happened in the 1960s, when we had very low interest rates. It was the go-go 60s. People were making lots of money. There was lots of new technology, just like in the 1920s. But the working class was feeling more and more disadvantaged as a result. And of course, everything fell apart during the 1970s. And these cycles, not only do they repeat, not only do they have the same sort of economic phenomenon attached to them, but I tie that all in with this skyscraper index, which is the very unlikely historical correlation between the building of a record setting high skyscraper and an imminent economic crisis. And I take the existing data set back into the 19th century, to when they first invented the elevator. Okay, so before the elevator, they could really only build 3 or 4 stories. People didn't want to walk any higher. But once they built the elevator and they had structural steel, engineers and architects could build ever higher. And when you went through these bubble processes from central banks and monetary policy, what you would see is that with an extended period of monetary expansion, that people would embark on these record-setting skyscrapers. Stock markets would boom, speculation would increase, and you'd get these sort of crazy stories about how wealthy people became during the bubbles. In Cantillon's time, it was like he was one of the first ever millionaires. And of course, we've gone through, in more modern times, where people have amassed fortunes of $100 million and $1 billion and billions of dollars. And now we're at the point where individuals have amassed trillion-dollar fortunes. Now, some of that is in inflationary terms. I mean, the dollar's depreciated a lot, and we've just moved in a lot of zeros, but it's the same sort of phenomenon. And the Austrian theory provides, I think, a very good analysis and story of how and why these cycles occur. Business cycles are not an inherent feature of the market economy. Business cycles are an inherent feature of monetary policy.
An inherent feature of monetary policy. Well, speaking of monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, what is your outlook as it relates to the Fed? Would love to just get an update from you since we last spoke. Yeah, what's your update there?
Well, I think the market's perception with higher oil prices and higher CPI reports coming in is that they've taken all of the anticipated rate cuts off of the board, at least for the rest of the year. And even with Kevin Warsh being nominated to the board, anticipating following President Trump's demands for interest rate cuts, the whole Fed structure is trying to gear up for the idea that they're going to be tough on inflation. The American people are definitely suffering. I mean, if you go out there in the streets, in the ditches, the American people are definitely suffering. And so they've got to put the message out that the Fed is inflating and that they're not bailing out the big wigs and the banks and all that kind of stuff. And they're not bailing out the stock market. So right now, the whole messaging is no cuts, be tough on inflation. Kevin Warsh's leaked testimony, tries to paint himself as somebody who's going to, be tough on inflation and that kind of thing.
Yeah, he said inflation is a choice and the Fed must take responsibility for it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just saw a Fed speaker on Friday, and he said the same thing. So it's already hard copy in the playbook of the Fed right now. So I can tell you right off that is part of the standard operating procedure at the Fed as of this week. I mean, it's clear that what they have to do, that's not their mandate. The American people are not their mandate. It's a misleading that the Fed's dual mandate is unemployment and inflation. Their real mandate, the one they don't talk about, is what they were created to do was to finance government debt, to take care of the government debt market on the one hand, and if necessary, take care of banks and financial institutions on the other hand. And so I think markets are actually accurately reflecting this, because when we see oil prices go up and gold prices go down, it's because oil prices are a threat to raise CPI and dampen any expectations of Fed rate cuts. And in the absence of the war and this debacle in the Persian Gulf, of course, oil prices would still be rising, but they would be like in the $60 a barrel range, not in the $90 in the barrel range. Eventually, oil prices are going to go much, much higher, but not right now. And but in the absence of the war, there would be this tremendous anticipation for rate cuts because of cracks in the financial system and kind of weaknesses in the labor market. And then, of course, all of the problems with government debt, trying to turn over $10 trillion of government debt. So that's what they would be fixated on. And the stock market would love that, of getting rate cuts. But gold would also like that, too. And so when it looks like the war is dissipating, then it gets a little bit brighter, at least temporarily, for more rate cuts. And so gold goes up because, things like interest rates, things like the value of the dollar, and things like oil prices all filter into gold and silver prices in the short run. And they kind of act as steering currents in the short run. But the long run, gold and silver prices are tied to money printing most directly, but then behind that is government debt and interest on the debt, government spending, which eventually requires more money printing. And so the long run trend, I think, is very bright there because, if government doesn't change its ways, there's going to have to be substantial amount of printing over the long run. And that's what, as the war diminishes, you find yourself, the market finds itself paying attention more to those long run trends, and gold and silver recover on a temporary basis. And it's kind of chaotic because every day you never know what's going on in the world over in the Middle East because of our propaganda and Iranian and Israeli propaganda and blackouts. And so the news feed is very, very poor, but you kind of get a very accurate idea of what's going on over there just by looking at gold prices and oil prices.
Hmm. Yeah. I think you've described precious metals as both a financial fire extinguisher and also a canary in the coal mine. Can you explain the distinction, and are they warning us right now?
Oh, yes. I mean, the canary in the coal mine idea is, of course, they used to put canaries down in coal mines, and with the idea that if the chemical leakages from the rock bed of dangerous gases were such that the canaries would die before the people got sick, and so they would keep them down there as an alert for danger. And in a free market economy, in a completely free market economy on a gold standard, or let's not even say gold standard, but let's say a market determined monetary policy, the price of gold, as it was in the 19th century and going back hundreds of years, and even up until 1971, the price of gold remains very, very constant. The purchasing power of gold and silver remain very, very constant over very, very long periods of time. That's the nature. The market chose gold and silver because of their constant purchasing power, and why they didn't choose something that had a highly variable purchasing power like the price of salmon or something like that. And so, if the price of gold goes up, that is an alert to everybody that the government is doing something. It's overspending, it's over borrowing, it's engaging in um, uh, foreign interventionism, war, or doing crazy things, which government is apt to do. And so, in that sense, it sends us an alarm. If we see the price of gold going up as it has the last few years, we know without looking at any of the other statistics or what government is actually doing that they're doing something wrong. And they're doing something that's harmful to the market economy, undermining the monetary system for consumers and investors, and the higher price is symptomatic of all of those bad actions. So it is an alert and to us. Now, the reason it's a fire extinguisher is because people who own gold and silver, who are silver stackers, who take a small percentage of their income on a regular basis and save it in the form of gold and silver, and they stack that money over time, assuming that we're not on a gold and silver monetary system where all of our money is gold and silver. So when you're on fiat money, it's a fire extinguisher in the sense that if you stack, part of your savings in there, it's always available to put out your personal fires, loss of jobs, a big medical bills, or an opportunity to buy a new house or whatever it happens to be. You have, and most importantly, when government does get out of control and is inflating the money supply, well, your gold and silver is going to appreciate in price. And so, what the government is doing wrong is going to have, at least in this respect, have a positive effect on you. So it's sort of offsetting what the bad things that the government is doing, and acting as kind of a shock absorber. Now, of course, I am always very prompt to point out that it really doesn't matter how much gold and silver we all stack. If we allow this process of central banks and government spending and debt to continue on, it's going to end badly for everybody. But if you've been stacking, you're going to be in a better position when the problems actually start emerging. And of course, the much higher prices of gold and silver. We've got record high price in gold. We've got record high prices in silver. Shortages of especially of silver. So I think that's, those are things that everybody should know.
So I take it on the gold and silver front, we're going a lot higher from here.
Yes. I mean, I would think so. Now, I know, there are some technical analysts that I know, and I know their work, and I appreciate their work. I respect their work, who they think we're due for another down leg in gold and silver prices. And the charts are very difficult to analyze right now. They're not straightforward. So I can't say that things are going to go immediately higher. But it certainly seems to me that, excuse me, that they're definitely going higher in the long run. And I would not be the least bit surprised if we get to new all-time highs in gold and new all-time highs in silver and other commodities too, because this is a commodity phenomenon. Gold and silver are just first in line. Oil's next, platinum, palladium. It's a structural phenomenon. And I expect, all commodity prices to trend higher and for new all-time records this year.
Let's talk about the state of the economy and markets. Like when you see markets touching new historic records, do you think that a lot of folks, I imagine a lot of people just probably feel like things are good, or might seem good. Does that create a more dangerous situation then? Like if there's this perception of everything's fine. Because I look on this channel, I'm just looking like our debt's north of 39 trillion. Like the problems aren't here yet, or they haven't been felt yet. So I'm just curious. I'm not really exactly sure how to ask the question, but seems like things are fine.
Oh, yes. I mean, things seem to be fine for sure. And we're all creatures of habit. And when stocks have been going up for 16 years, and the last real crisis was the financial crisis. I mean, the COVID crisis was a big time crisis, but as far as the recession was very short, the pullback in stocks was very short duration. So it goes back a long time, and we're creatures of habit, and people are not really concerned or even looking at their portfolios or their investments because it's just been on autopilot, and that is dangerous where people don't know the status. So stocks ever higher, and unemployment is very low. But of course, we've cut off immigration, and there's been a lot of retirements. So the labor market labor supply is shrinking greatly. And so the unemployment rate's going to look good for sure.
The last time you and I spoke, you outlined your concerns around hyperinflation and that we're on a path toward hyperinflation. Does that thesis still stand for you today? Is that still like the big worry?
Oh, yes. Actually, we've taken another step on the highway to hyperinflation because of this war, because it's revealed that the petrodollar is no longer a strong phenomenon. That the U.S. cannot defend our allies around the Persian Gulf, and Iran has really smacked the United States, and it smacked Israel down completely, and also the local regimes. It's threatened them, and it's basically part of BRICS, and it wants to sell its oil in other currencies, most specifically the Chinese yuan, which the Iranians and the Chinese have been exchanging with one another, and they want that to continue, and so they're requesting that oil sales in the Persian Gulf to get through the Strait of Hormuz is to be done in Chinese yuan. So that's a direct threat to the petrodollar, which was supposedly a pillar of the value of the U.S. dollar, and why foreigners had to hold and use U.S. dollars. And so that is another step on the road to the hyperinflation of the dollar. And, because the U.S. dollar, it's always depended upon being able to print and having foreigners hold U.S. dollars. In other countries, holding treasury bonds, holding U.S. cash in the underground economy, dollarized economies around the world. So, so that's a big threat. And as the demand to hold U.S. dollars go down, at the same time that the supply is expected to increase greatly, it's going to lower the value of the dollar. And, eventually the hyperinflation is a steamrolling of the process where it's not mechanical, really. It's just that people wake up and say, I'm not holding dollars anymore. And that's when the system unravels, and you see what you see is the price of gold goes hyperbolic relative to the fiat currency, as it's done in other hyperinflations, where people just lose faith in the local paper currency, and they, Mises called it the crack up boom phenomenon, where people just try to dump the local currency in favor of any tangible goods. And that's, that really distinguishes a regular, normal inflation that we're all used to, and a hyperinflationary event, which nobody is used to really. They've occurred in the third world and the second world in recent years, but it's very isolated. If it happens to the U.S. dollar, of course, it's going to be a big global event, and we will lose our monopoly status to some of the BRIC currencies and the euro, and possibly cryptocurrencies, and other new things that might emerge.
Like that would be the end of our reserve status?
Well, nobody's really anticipating the end of the reserve status. 15 years ago, I reviewed a book about all this, and the guy said, well, nothing's going to happen forever because nobody can imagine anything ever being different. Well, things have become different. I mean, there's the crypto, which is an affront to fiat money. There's the BRIC currencies, which is an affront to fiat money, the dollar in particular. And now gold is now making up more than 50% of all central bank reserves. So, yes, I mean, the U.S. dollar had a near monopoly as a reserve currency, dollars and treasury bonds as central bank reserves, and a near monopoly in international trade, making exchanges on international markets. Everything was bought and sold on international markets. in terms of U.S. dollars. And both of those two factors, which have created the almighty dollar, are unraveling slowly but surely. And of course, there's other things like the underground economy and black markets where the U.S. dollar has been so dominant for so many years. That could very quickly come undone too with either cryptocurrencies or precious metals, and other new competitors into the marketplace. So it's really hard to tell and determine because it's really a mental phenomenon where people eventually have enough of suffering from inflation and seeing the real value of their assets being undermined, and they just give up and say, I want something real. I want something tangible. I want something different. I've got to make a new choice. And people are making new choices. I mean, uh, people can put their money away in other foreign currencies, for example. Right now, banks offer the ability to invest in other currencies, cryptocurrency. In other countries, you could put your pensions, your retirements, and your savings into gold and silver. So um, it's definitely moving apace, and I think the pace has increased in recent years. And I think this mad adventure in the Persian Gulf um, is really going to accelerate this whole phenomenon because it's going to kick out this whole idea of the petrodollar status for the U.S. dollar. And so we'll have to see what happens on the other side. And I'm just hoping and praying that situation does get completely unwound as quickly as possible with as little death and injuries in all of those various countries, as well as the destruction of capital. I've made a big issue on my podcast and other podcasts about, that people just don't understand um, what the Middle East does for the rest of the world. They just think of it in terms of how much is it going to cost me to fill up my gas tank in my car, my truck. But that is really just the beginning of it. And it's really important. They produce a lot of industrial goods, industrial inputs, that affect a wide variety of industries. And the only good thing I can say about it is about the trade war and this war in the Middle East is it's making people realize that the economy is a lot more complicated than they ever thought. That the price of their helium balloons in the grocery store is going to go up because of the war in the Middle East. I mean, they wouldn't possibly imagine those interconnections. But that's really how things actually work in the real world. Every time you see a massive amount of exchanges taking place between, two groups, those raw materials can factor into the production of many, many goods. And each one of those goods can be inputs into a wide variety of other goods. And it all permeates throughout the world economy so that, even if things get fixed in the Middle East, food production is going to fall and people are going to go hungry. People are probably going to starve as a result of what's going on over there in the Middle East because not enough fertilizer is being produced, not enough fertilizer is being distributed and used in farms for this crop season. Crop yields are in all likelihood going to go lower and prices are going to go higher into a world in which the average person's budget is already stretched too thin. And so it's going to be really hard times, especially when you get into lesser developed countries and third world nations where they're barely eking by in the first place, and where fertilizer has been one of the major boons to their standard of living. And all of a sudden, they get cut off because, of course, their low status on the distribution chain. So, that's not much of a consolation prize that people are learning how complicated the world of economics is. But, hopefully policymakers, and I don't even think economists understand this by and large. Most economists are, I was going to say chalkboard economists, but we don't use chalkboards anymore. But they don't really understand the real intricacies of business. And that's really, as a kid, I worked in my father's business when I was a young boy. I had a paper route. I had my own business cutting grass, shoveling snow. And, I was involved in that from a very early age. And I realized, it's really hard and complicated to make money. And those were all the simplest things in life. And I've learned throughout my career that things are extremely complicated, way beyond any one person knowing how the economy works precisely. And that's what, F.A. Hayek, Mises's graduate student, he won a Nobel Prize. He's very famous for the article about the use of knowledge in society. And what he did was he showed that the market system, the price system, was this early networking system where everybody could know the basics of what they needed to know about the relative scarcity of all inputs and raw materials and labor and so forth in the economy, so that they could make their decisions about consumption and production. And Hayek framed all that as kind of like a pre-computer device that economized on the use of knowledge about all of these complicated situations in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Mark Thornton, it is always a pleasure having you on the show. Before I let you go, let folks know where they can find and support and learn more about the work that you're doing at the Mises Institute. And let's leave this audience with some parting thoughts. I know we didn't get to solutions in this episode, but give them something to think about before we have you on again. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Julia. We're in Auburn, Alabama, but our website is mises.org, named after the great Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises. We have all kinds of publications, podcasts, lectures, books, newsletters. We have programs here at the Institute and around the country. We started a book reading clubs around the country and around the world. There's always new and great things at the Institute, where we're trying to bring the world of Austrian economics to everybody out there, not just students, not just professors, but everybody out there. All of our stuff is really written and digestible for a very general public audience. And it's a great story. We're all optimistic because we've seen so much progress with respect to the Austrian school, with respect to people's mindsets. We're not the majority opinion, but the number of people who know of us, like us, support us, are interested in what we have to say, think we have the right solutions, is growing by leaps and bounds. And you don't need a majority to make social change. You just need to have all of the leaders and shakers thinking about fixing the world, improving the world. And a lot of those people have adopted a mindset based on Austrian economics, that the world works best when solutions come from the bottom up, where individuals build themselves and their households up from the bottom, where businesses build themselves up from the bottom, entrepreneurship, where communities build themselves up from the bottom, small businesses becoming larger businesses, hiring more people, inventing new ways of doing things, inventing new products. Everything works better from the bottom up. And really, nothing works well when the solutions come from the top down. And that's really what we teach. We don't tell people you must support the market economy and you must think that freedom is great. We show people how markets work and why markets always work, why free markets work so well, and why government, even well-intentioned government, just simply does not work. It always fails. It tends to make the problems worse over time. And that's really resonating. And that's why I'm so very optimistic moving forward that we really can. I know things are dark right now, but people are coming to our point of view at such a rapid rate. Even this terrible tragedy in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf is exposing this obvious bad top-down approach, of the political elites in society that can really control things and control our politicians even, that they're in it for themselves. And, their role is really being exposed because of this whole Epstein file fiasco thing, which is telling that story. And it fits right into the K-shaped economy, the Cantillon effects, what we're seeing in today's economy. And so, again, I am very, very optimistic and very grateful to be on your show to be able to share that optimism.
Dr. Mark Thornton, Senior Fellow at the Mises Institute. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time, all of your knowledge, your wisdom, helping us all learn and get better. Really, really appreciate you.
Thank you, Julia.